Okay, so sorry about the background noise or anything like that. I'm trying to do this best I can. Um, I honestly think that there are 3 ways to color hair. Um, the one is, let me pick a color you can see. Light to dark. 2 is dark to light. And 3 is your mid. It's really cool on how you want to take it, but mostly when I do mid, I usually do mid to dark, and then I throw light on top. Hopefully this is, I make sense, because every once in a while I don't. You do want to, I tend to think that, you know, when you do it, you might, I color a lot quicker. So I tend to have my stabilizer up here up at 15. Some people like to have it a little slower, so maybe changing it to like an S3 or something so it's not so brazen with strokes. Good thing to do, so I'm going to start with the mid just because that's one of my more normal. Pick a color. I'm missing a spot back here. Holy bitches. Let me go ahead and color that in messily, haphazardly. Pick a few colors here.
Looks like my Twitter feed thing kind of worked. Because they finally tweeted.
I don't like that one. And according on like what shade you're using, you may want to like play around with your combos. I tend to, when I do reds, I tend to use more like a oranges kind of color when I get to my highlights and stuff.
It has a cap.
But I'm going to sit here and I usually work on the layer, which is probably not a great idea, but sometimes you can use different kinds of brushes. A lot of people tend to stick to using the pin button. So you have the option of, well, I always forget to change my color, of the pin. It's very brazen, it's very right there, right then and there. Some people, when they get their colors, they like to use the blend tool on top of it. Because you kind of just get that light, like shadow kind of effect on it. I usually don't like it just single. I usually come back in with the blur brush. Just to kind of try and smooth it back out a little bit, but I don't use it too much. Another option I've been exploring is like using the water brush, the watercolor brush on top of it, just to kind of give it that like effect. As you can see, it just kind of smooths it out. And then the other one is, let's say, so I take darker color. I tend to use the Copic rather than the Copic 2, just because of the way it sits. And if you do that and then you throw a little water on it, you can kind of get that like nice blend. But especially with like anime style, it's very like sectioned off. But let's get back to the point here. So I have my red. I'm going to go back in with my second shade. I'm going to start with a little larger brush on my pen tool. Sorry, I colored a little faster. Let me change that back. Usually I like to think it's according on where you want the light to come from. I'm going to kind of act like it's coming from anywhere, because that's just kind of how I draw. You'll have some lines that you can or can't use. You know, you may have a position with a hand, and you definitely want to think about that. So definitely throw in your shades. I start from there and move outward. So I just kind of throw these in here. I'm going to go ahead and connect that shadow. I could even color it in, because if I'm thinking about the hand is right there. come back into the top of the head. Apparently I colored that. Oh, I colored that on a different layer. Okay, so we're gonna go back in. There we go. Color in for that. Color in for that. Finger here. And I'm gonna go back in here, follow my lines, just to kind of give it some continuity. Right here I have a part, so I'm going to throw in a little shadow there. And right now I've kind of got that very sectioned off kind of look to where the shadows are very forced into place. It's been a while since I've colored some awesome hair, so bear with me if it doesn't freeze. It has a tendency to do that. I'm gonna come underneath here. And it doesn't exactly have to be, you know, perfect, you know, but you do probably want to make sure that you select the hair so that way you're just coloring in it. So I've kind of got it started here with some portions. So I can go, I always say to take it one shade at a time. Like right now you could probably come back in, throw one here, you know, this line can go this way. If I wanted to start up here, you know, I can say that this line comes down here, even though I didn't draw that line there. You can kind of just add whatever you want. The point of like the anime is just to kind of like section it off where you want it to be. So like, let's say I want this part to have a shade and the others to not. But a lot of the people, when they tend to do this, they'll come back in with the blur tool to smooth out the edge, but still get that hard crease with the shading. So as you can see, I'm kind of just throwing that on there, but I still get that very hard edge on it, which I do use that often when I color hair, but a lot of the time I end up coming back in with my blend brush, especially if I want it to be really like just kind of there for the effect. I don't want that to be my major defining factor. So I kind of smudge it out. Come back in with my blur tool so it doesn't look so messy. And usually when I work from mid, I work from mid to dark. And just kind of like this. And usually whenever, you know, you throw in more than one color, you want to start with your first like shading one like really thick. So that way you kind of get that gradient effect. So this is a good area to kind of like show that in. Let me zoom in here. Freaking bitches. Right here. I know, it's a little messy. I'm sorry. So I'm going to come in. I'm going to kind of follow the same path. But instead I'm going to throw in this little extra little spoopy. One of like the things is you can either leave it as a hard kind of section off, or if you want you can always round off your corners so they're a little cleaner. It's completely up to you. But you see right here I have that line. I can always throw in a little bit of a shadow kind of there with just a single line. So I'm going to come in, see how I usually do it with the blend tool first, just to kind of like smudge it out, and I can control that and where it goes, kind of. And if I want it to come out a little, I can make it come out a little, if not, you know, etc. Kind of come in, go in with the blur tool, see how that just kind of like finalizes it a little bit. I'll go ahead and show you the other ways that I tend to do it. So I could take my Copic kind of like blends it for you. If you've ever used Copic markers, they're fucking fantastic. I'm kind of using a big size brush here, which isn't a great thing, but for the purpose of this video, I'll take it. And sometimes I'll come back in with like the water brush just to kind of smooth it out if I need it to be smooth, but with it being hair, having it kind of like that, I can do it just fine. Now, I have the density turned down a little bit on this brush just because it's so brazen at times, so I can get a little rough and tough with it, with my pressure, with my pin. And I just kind of come back in and kind of stroke it in. I think I'm just going to kind of linger in this area just for the portion of shadows and blah blah blah. But as you can see, I can just keep layering this on here, and I just do one stroke over with that water tool, and then I'm going to come back in with an even darker color. Now this would be a great time to just use, so this is going to be a great example of just using the blur tool, because I don't want a lot of this darker shadow in here, which is why I'm kind of like bringing it really light in there, just because I have a habit. And as you can see, I don't use a full density on my blend tool either, which I honestly don't think, unless you're really wanting to fuck something up, that you should do. So I'm just going to use it right here in the corner just to kind of smooth it out, because I really don't want it to be too in your face. And you can be a little messy with it. At least I think so. Someone may tell you you can't, but just kind of gives it that characteristic. So I'm going to come back in with my blur tool, and I'm going to just throw that right on the top. As you can see, I'm not really like taking it over the whole thing. I'm just kind of riding out the edge of it, because I do kind of still want it to have that like form, and in some ways I want it to have that hard cutting edge, like right there. I want it to be clear. Now you're probably looking at this and you're going, well, that's really dark. So I can come back in with my original color, turn down my brush size, and just right there in the middle. I'm just going to do a bunch of strokes.
38 alive. I don't know what to do.
Come back in. You can either, you know, blur tool
I sold me, buddy. The scope. Oh, this is amazing.
and do that. I find it easier to go back in with the blend tool, or, you know, which with the blend tool I would kind of at this point use a larger one, so that way you get
I actually go back to you guys.
and really focus there, like in the middle of it. Not too much towards the ends, but more towards the middle. Don't be afraid to drag it into your dark color either. Worst case scenario, you can always go backwards and, you know, undo it. Just like kind of like, so if I think that that's a little too much, I can go back in.
Tires, and they're like, well, we're driving.
take this down. Let's see, let's go with a, yeah, 20. So I'm just kind of a few strokes, not much.
That was fun. See you later. Yeah, yeah. Bye, Felicia.
Well, except for there, because I did a shit ton. A little too much. And I would just kind of let your brush run the play of it. Kind of get a feel for it, the strokes, and how you want them to be. And then I'm going to come in here. Go and grab another color. And I'm not going to take them as far. I'm just going to kind of do them in the midst where I want that like color to be. Come back in, fade it on out. Come back in with my blur tool. Now, the reason I don't like using the blur tool too much anymore is you kind of get that like fuzzy kind of feeling from it. So what some of the people tend to do, they end up taking this line. They'll do a few of them just so you kind of get the idea. No, I should do this on a different layer. Hold on.
Pretty sure you can. I've seen people shoot out of fingers.
Which this is really common with anime. You can change that luminosity, that mode of your thing, and you can do according to what you need. Usually what they end up doing for these is they'll do like an overlay. And you know that overlay changes based on how much you want it. Which the darker the color, you know, it's going to be darker on there, but let's say I went in with this kind of shade. You just see kind of that how that turns a little orange. It kind of gives that like burn feel. And I can come back in again on top of that with a new layer, and it's gonna just say, oh holy shit, what the fuck are you doing? And it's just gonna go white. But back to the overlay layer. If I come back in and I take that blur tool, I'm gonna make it just a little bigger, a little too much. Just gonna do a swipe, just one. See what it just kind of does there? So if I don't think it's enough, I go back in, do it again. So now I've got that kind of like feel on it. And you could really honestly do that with any anime kind of drawing. I don't want to say all, but anime has this very like highlighter kind of sense to it. That color's just way too light. So I'm going to take this and come back in here and pick a different shade.
Yeah, red zone kills the
And come back in, blur tool.
yeah.
Until I get it to where I want it. The biggest idea I find, so as I back out, you can see now that I have some serious shade going on, etc. Every once in a while, if I don't like, I like the way that it's shaded, but I don't like the color, I'll select it, I'll come back into filter. I can just kind of change that, like if I want it to be a little redder, you know, saturate it a little more, make it a little lighter. do contrast, deepen the color. But you can't play with that too much because then you lose your texture. But as you can see, you know, I kind of got that feel in there, that play, but I feel like it's super...
I saw a guy sitting on these barrels.
See, I'm gonna come back in with my blur tool
There was a guy
right in here,
sitting
because I think it's a little too brazen, and I want it to be really soft.
And he downed, but he disappeared when I downed.
And now that I've kind of got that feel in there,
I'm pretty sure I just saw
I
somebody
can come
sitting
back
the
in with
bar
this
on
lighter color.
these barrels.
I would just play around with your brushes too. Just figure out which ones you like, which ones you don't. Because as you can see, I love using this Copic. I just kind of get that sensual kind of mixture with it. Sometimes it's a little too much, but as you can see, it's really subtle and light.
I freaked out because I
But
thought somebody.
yeah,
I freaked out because I thought somebody was stalking me. Like,
that's
just
kind of
sitting
like
in the middle of
that
the thing
there.
watching videos.
And then so we're gonna go over here to the dark to light. This is the one I tend to have most issues with, especially. Let me fix this because it's gonna bother me. Especially black. Black isn't one of my favorite things to color. So I'm gonna turn this. Deselect this. So I'm gonna pick a darker shade. With black, I kind of don't set a palette. I just kind of come in and go for it. If you're wondering what the circles are for, that's that way I could select it and fill it easily because those were open ends. So usually with black, it's a definitely a good one to use the pen tool with, I believe. So if I come in, I definitely want to pick, you know, the middle of it. I just kind of want to do strokes. So I'm using the pen tool. Kind of think of it like wavelengths, sort of kind of like how you see anime hair. You really kind of want to give it that idea of a sheen.
I want to know if that guy like heard the shots or if he was kind of down.
So as you can see, I'm just kind of getting it in there. Really thinking about how I want these to lay. Do I want it to come down a lot? Do I want it to stay where it's at? Now, this is where it's going to get a little tricky. Is whenever you do go to shade undersides, you definitely don't want to choose the blackest black that you have. Because then you're going to run into issues with, you know, you don't have anywhere to go. So I'm taking the blur tool right now. I'm just kind of running over those lines. Just the edges. Just the edges. Because I still want that middle to be very blatant and bright. And I kind of just want the edges to fade into what I have. And just kind of like this. And sometimes it helps if you just kind of move it in the direction you're wanting it to go to rather than just dragging it straight down. I find a lot of it easier. So I picked a lighter color, going back in with my pen tool. I'm going to layer it back on top. But I'm not going to do it as heavily. Well, I kind of lied on that, but you get what I mean. I'm not doing as many strokes. I'm making sure that, you know, I have a little bit of some thicker ones in there just for the highlight. Blend. Oh, sorry. I'm trying to do this one with just the blur tool. And come back in. I kind of want to run it over all of it now. because I kind of wanted to get all that fill. So if I'm going to blur the lighter color, I want to do that to the color behind it too, so I kind of get that feel on it.
Dude, you can see him sitting there, like, in my...
As you see, it looks really nice up in this top area.
Like, he was just glitched there
And just
for
kind
so
of
long.
keep layering. Just simple strokes.
You have that right down.
Come back in with my blur tool.
I'm just like, I have no idea.
Back and forth. Just once. Or twice. Whichever, until you feel that you like it. So as you can see, those back colors tend to start fading out, but we've now thrown in a lighter highlight. Sometimes I feel like if they're too wide, I'll just throw in some smaller ones. Or some fresher ones, and I won't go back in with that tool just yet, because I'm eventually going to come in here and I'm going to come in with a lighter one, and I'm just going to do smaller strokes here. Whoop. But this is one of the reasons why I tend to not like the blur tool and using that way. You can come back in with like that water tool. I love the water in the Copics, and see how that just kind of can smooth it out a little too much sometimes. You can do that. You can come in with, you know, that Copic tool. You know, I kind of just keep on working on it, because as you can see, you can still get those bits of, you know, the line work in there even when you smooth it out. So just kind of keep going. Keep going. And it's never too much. Well, it's probably a lie, but see here, I'm going to come over right on top of that. Now when I feel like it gets too light, I can go back down into my black. This is the great part. I can now take my black and go pretty heavy with it, seeing as I didn't start out with it, and create that kind of feeling, you know, an anime where you get like that really jagged, kind of anime kind of feel to it. And it just kind of gives you that extra bit of dimension. So I'm going to come in here and smooth that out with the blur tool. This is one of those times where I absolutely will use the blur tool. So you can see I kind of just get that like sheen effect in a way. And sometimes they'll come back in even after I've done the black, and I'll just throw in a few lines. Oh, I messed up there. Because I want it to follow how I want the hair to curve. Come back in with my blur tool. Now, if I'm going to do this, I just kind of want to do like a once over in the middle, and then I really want to take out the ends. you know, some people tend to they'll do that kind of thing. You come in and do an overlay just to kind of give it that, you know, oh look, I've got this like light kind of thing. You know, you can always play with it too, you know, figure out which one you like, which one you don't. But a lot of anime will take it and they'll say, you know, I want, you know, this part sectioned off. You know, this is another way to do it. But this is probably where you'll get most of it. So this is the light to dark. This is what I work most often in. I do tend to work light to dark, and I see there is a certain point to it. Okay, so I'm gonna come in here.
I also get direct text messages
Just like this.
every time.
So the way that the anime works
'Cause
is they'll have you
follow the
section it off. So make very decisive, clean cuts
text messages from your kids. I'll know exactly what
on where you want that color.
works.
So that way you don't have to worry about coloring outside the lines. You could also, so I'm going to do this. Let me go ahead and clean this up a little bit. This may help. I am a messy. Hold on. I am a messy color person. I am very brazen. Very, very brazen when I color. If you do this and press your mask layer, we're going to do this real quick. As you can see, I have selection, edit, undo. Make sure you click back over to the main layer here. Make sure you're not on the mask. Very brazen. As you can see, big large dot. Boop. Oh, look. No color. No color. It basically blocks it off to where you can't color outside of your lines where you want it. So if you select what you want, come over here, mask it, and it's gonna let you color how you want to, without worrying about staying inside your lines. So here we go. But like I've been saying, I kind of recommend just kind of playing with your brushes. I started in Photoshop, and I really relied on the smudge tool because I didn't have anything like the blend tool or anything like that. And, you know, as you can see, sorry, real quick, I'm throwing in just kind of little tendrils just to kind of give the hair a little more characteristic. I don't want to connect those. Because it doesn't always have to fall where your lines are. And you kind of want to just symbolize where light kind of hits in a way. So I can sit here and I can do this. Block it off. Let me finish this through here and we'll just kind of I'm not really worried about this portion, I'm just kind of going for it. Well, now that I've said that and I see it, I can't. Okay, so I've come in, I've taken one of my colors, so I'm going to come back in with a darker color on top of that. Some people will do it layer by layer, and some people will do it all at once. So let me quickly just kind of feed this in here. As you can see, not as much. It's just enough to really just kind of provide that shade on top of a shade. I'm kind of following the same paths. Usually when I draw hair too, I put a lot of lines in mine, so I have a lot to go by. I usually have it very sectioned off anyways when I draw. So I'm going to come back in here. Just kind of like this.
Obvious.
Go ahead and just kind of finish out, you know, if you want this to be a little lighter, go ahead and make it a little lighter. So let's see. So they'll come back in, they'll take their blur tool and hash that out. See, I'm just kind of doing it stroke by stroke, just because I don't want it to be all at once. And sometimes you kind of want it to be a little more than others. Like in this section, I would technically take my blend tool up with the color that I need, which is that darker shade color, and I would bring it down. But just because, you know, that's the underside of the hair, that's, you know, I want that to have a little bit of characteristic. But just come back in, throw a blur on top of it. And you see, if I leave it undone like that on the underside, I find it a little weird to have this just like curve. You see that? That's a little awkward. So I'm just going to come in and finish doing this. And as you can see, it's, you know, you get that very sectioned off look. You get that, those multitude of layers. Blonde isn't exactly my specialty either. Why did I pick Luxe, you ask? I have no idea. You can, so at this point, you could probably come in. Throw a little color on top. Notice I'm trying to not sketch in my lines, because that's just how I draw. I could do, no, oh hell no. Binary's going to make it too dark. Overlay's going to make it too yellow, so I might want to do it as shade. And you see how that just kind of makes it darker, and then you can come back in as a different layer. You know, at this point it doesn't matter. I can just test this out, see if I like it or not. And if I do, keep it. If not, you know, I can always change the opacity on that, but I'm just taking the blur tool over top of that. Just trying to add in a little more characteristic. Blur that out. You know, I'm just throwing a shade over here on it. You know, I think that's just a little. See, that's the difference. I just kind of want to throw it on there very lightly, just to kind of give it that, you know, effect. You could also do going with the luminosity tool. You know, we're gonna it might help if I use something other than the blur tool. Okay, so if I come in here, just my regular, and your luminosity, just see how that kind of like brightens it. I always say kind of use this one with leisure. this is where you can kind of get that nitty-gritty kind of like highlight, and I'm gonna turn down the opacity, see what that does to it. But I don't really like that. So I'm gonna leave it at full opacity. Just kind of play around with it. But you see what happens when I try to blur it? It gets really.
I feel like you would use the tablet mode less often.
It gets really out there. So luminosity is kind of one of those things for that. You kind of have to
That'd probably be the number one benefit is watching
be
video.
careful with. I definitely think it's great if you, let's say, you want it to be really dark. Let's say it's like really dark in this main area here, and you have a nice light source coming in from the top. I can just come in with that. I'm gonna brighten up that top side, and that's gonna make it definitely seem like I've got that light source coming in from the top because it's making it nice and bright and shiny. But a lot of the time in anime, what they'll do is, so I'm going to do this, I'm going to preserve the opacity, choose this color, your darker shade that you have, and go just a hair darker. Nope, up. No, but you have to do it on your line layer. So on your line layer, you'll do preserve opacity. And you'll just come in here, throw that on top. Yeah, I'm going to be a little messy about it just because I'm just doing this for show.
I wish I could just change out the battery.
No, and sometimes, I think that the color I've chosen is just a little too dark, so I'll go back up if I wanted to mesh just a little bit more, so I'm just focusing on the shading of it rather than the lining of it. See how nicely it blends, like right up here, up at the bangs area? That blends really nicely. And what you can do, now that we've gotten that kind of switched over, just kind of throw in some lines. Oh, not like that. That's the same color as your line work, and that's going to kind of give you that hair flowing kind of thing, especially in like anime where they have, this little part flying out, this little part flying out. If this person's fallen over, their hair is going to be kind of sticking up. And, changing that line color is really going to kind of give you that ability to play. Always try some lighter ones.
If I had a choke, I would make it easy.
The lighter ones look a little weird, but it just kind of allows you to, you come back in and select that color. Like right in here, I could have right down in here. This one is probably one of the ways that you'll probably go. And just take that and see how, delicate that looks. Just really light. And just take it in there with the same color as your lines. But you can always just kind of go back in. Throw in some of that highlight, lighten it back up just a hair and do that one stark white. I just think it's a little too much because I kind of still wanted to have that golden kind of shade to it. But as you can see, that just kind of lightens it back up. Just come back in with your blur tool. I hope this kind of helps a little. I'm not the greatest at this kind of thing. But, you had like the one over here where we had the nice shading with red, and then you had, dark to light. I think that one's going to be one of the harder transitions, but if you kind of work with like your base color, the one that you kind of want to be your main shade to work around, definitely light to dark is a good one, especially starting with that and then just building the colors around it, because you can always make it lighter or take it back to that original color. And you don't have to worry about working around the shades like we did in like the mid and all that. Usually if I'm doing reds, I have a tendency to do the starting with my mid shade, mainly because of how it comes out. But starting like light and moving to dark, especially with anime, don't forget on your line layer to do that preserve opacity and change that line color to match that darker shade. Just make it just a hair darker than what that darkest shade is on the hair that you have, and just throw in some nice little tendrils on there just to make it seem a little lively, or if you want it to be that blunt, just really just kind of section it off. Great ways with hair, as some people do, is, let me, just gonna kind of color this here, take a darker color, make this a little smaller. So I'm gonna do that. I know I want that there. These are a little thick, it's a little crude, but, you get the point. And you could always come back in and just take that blur tool just over the edges of it rather than through the whole thing if you feel like it's, doing too much. I personally don't use the blur tool all the time. But as you can see, like, it can help in a way. But, playing with your tools, so if I'm using, like, the Copic tool, I love Copics. If you've ever played with Copic markers, it's fantastic. It just kind of, like, lightly blends for you already. And then just kind of use those strokes for the texture. Come back in, darker color. Wherever I want to place them. I can always just kind of come in here on top with a lighter color and go for it. This water tool, this is what it's going to do, just kind of smooth it out. Give it that, like, really nice finish to it. Well, at least I think so. And in some cases, that may not work. Some people will come in, because of, like, the lightness of the marker tool, they'll use the pen, come in with their biggest, brightest fucking whatever, and then come back in with that marker tool. Which this is another option too. You can always use that pen tool, then come over with the marker, because the marker is just kind of like that Copic in a way. I just find it difficult if I'm using the marker on anything except for, so we've sectioned it off again, come back in, if I do blend, it's going to make it dark, which you don't want. Take that blur on it, marker's already kind of messy, so throwing a blur on it isn't going to do too much. But according on who you talk to is according to how they're going to tell you to work. But I really honestly think it's based on what you like. But anyways, hopefully this helps. Hopefully I wasn't a